As we descend further into this unfolding enigma and uncover the full scale of upheaval gripping the planet's most silent realm, a new dimension of the mystery emerges, one that reveals the deep sea not simply as a distant frontier, but as a living, reactive system connected to every tremor, every temperature shift, every chemical alteration occurring across the Earth, and it becomes clear that the creatures rising toward the surface are not anomalies but messengers from a destabilized world. Signals from an ancient domain that has begun to crack under pressures it can no longer bear. For millions of years, the deep ocean functioned as Earth's vast memory chamber, a place where evolutionary forces worked slowly, where species mastered survival in crushing darkness, and where environmental change happened on geological timelines rather than human ones. But today, as climate systems accelerate beyond anything the deep has ever endured, those creatures adapted to stability, persistence, and predictability find themselves trapped inside a collapsing equilibrium. Consider the deep scattering layer, a colossal living curtain of fish, squid, plankton, and gelatinous forms that rises and falls with the day-night cycle, acting as the heartbeat of the ocean's interior. This layer is now warping, thinning in some places, thickening in others, warping in shape as rising temperatures restructure the migrations of species within it, causing sections of the layer to accidentally rise higher than intended, dragging predators and prey upward into sunlit waters, where their bodies are overwhelmed by shock, resulting in sudden mass appearances that puzzle fishermen and coastal communities. In other zones, oxygen minimum layers are expanding like underwater deserts, creating suffocating barriers that trap deep-sea creatures between low oxygen zones below and warming waters above, forcing them into the upper ocean in a desperate bid for survival, often ending in mass strandings or floating carcasses, grim indicators that the deep world is losing its refuge. Meanwhile, vast internal tides, underwater waves taller than skyscrapers, have begun shifting patterns as melting polar ice alters Earth's gravitational balance and reshapes the density structure of the oceans, causing these colossal waves to collapse or break in regions where they once flowed smoothly, lifting deep organisms upward like debris caught in a rising flood. And far from the coasts, mid-ocean gyres, massive circular currents are shifting their boundaries, dragging deep and mid-water species upward as swirling upwellings intensify, creating windows where ancient creatures suddenly breach the surface in surreal displays that defy everything science once assumed about their behavior. At the same time, artificial light from fishing fleets and industrial operations is now penetrating the upper layers of the open ocean on a scale never seen before, drawing deep-sea creatures upward like accidental lures, confusing their sensory systems and breaking the hardwired instincts that once kept them anchored to the darkness. Some species follow these unnatural lights to their death, rising until pressure differences cause catastrophic physiological failure, turning the ocean's surface into a graveyard for misled organisms. And beneath all of these events lies one of the most haunting drivers of all, the growing silence of the deep as its ancient acoustic landscapes collapse under the weight of noise pollution, sonar blasts, seismic surveys, and the rumble of global shipping reverberate across the abyss with a violence that disorients species relying on subtle vibrations and pressure cues to navigate, communicate, and hunt, leaving them adrift in a sensory storm so overwhelming that they flee upward simply to escape the chaos below, emerging into the surface layers dazed, damaged, or dying. Yet the greatest revelation is not the creatures themselves, it is what their ascent symbolizes, the unraveling of Earth's most vital stabilizing engine. For the deep ocean controls climate, carbon storage, nutrient cycles, and the long-term habitability of the planet. When its creatures rise in distress, when its ecosystems tremble, when its silence fractures, it means the entire planetary system is shifting, tilting, and warning. Each sighting, whether of a massive oarfish gliding like a silver serpent, a bloated anglerfish washed ashore with its bioluminescent lure still glowing, or a translucent gulper eel drifting near fishing boats, is not merely a biological curiosity, but a signal flare from the abyss declaring that environmental thresholds are being crossed. And so, as these deep-sea creatures breach the boundary between darkness and daylight, they force humanity to confront a truth we have long ignored: the deep is not an alien world separated from our own, but the foundation upon which our climate, our oceans, and our future depend, and its rising inhabitants are telling us, in the only language they know, that the great balance of the earth is changing faster than the ancient world beneath can endure. As this vast investigation pushes deeper into the heart of the ocean's oldest mysteries, we begin to uncover a truth so profound, so sweeping in scale, that it reframes the rise of deep-sea creatures not as isolated anomalies but as part of a planetary shift echoing through every corner of the marine world, revealing a chain reaction of events that begins thousands of meters below the surface and culminates in the haunting appearances that now capture global attention. For in those crushing depths where sunlight has never touched, where pressures exceed anything humans can imagine, and where life evolved in slow motion over millions of years, small disturbances cascade into colossal consequences, and what we are now witnessing at the surface is nothing less than the ocean's silent distress call. To understand this crisis fully, we must examine the deep's ancient circulatory system, an intricate network of thermohaline currents that function like the ocean's bloodstream, distributing heat, oxygen, and nutrients around the world. But climate change is weakening this system, slowing the great conveyor belt of water that keeps the deep habitable, causing pockets of stagnation where oxygen dwindles to lethal levels, forcing species upward in a desperate attempt to survive. In regions where these deep currents falter, strange upwellings occur that can physically lift deep-sea organisms hundreds or even thousands of meters closer to the surface, carrying with them species that have never experienced light or warmth, and when these creatures breach the upper layers, their bodies designed for eternal cold and immense pressure begin to break down, leaving them disoriented, vulnerable, and visible to humanity in ways that ancient evolution never prepared them for. Meanwhile, shifting tectonic patterns are triggering seismic events that disturb entire deep-sea valleys, sending shockwaves that scatter fragile communities like plumes of living dust. Colossal landslides on the ocean floor create underwater avalanches that sweep fish, corals, and gelatinous forms into higher strata, delivering them into the path of human research vessels, fishing nets, or coastal currents that carry them ashore. Even more unsettling are the discoveries emerging from deep-sea trenches, where scientists have found evidence that long-term warming is accelerating the metabolism of species that once required near-freezing temperatures to maintain biological stability, pushing them to seek cooler environments that now lie above rather than below, causing vertical migrations that defy millions of years of adaptation. In some cases, entire ecosystems are shifting upward, layer by layer, as if the deep is slowly rising toward the surface, collapsing the ancient separation between Earth's darkest realms and the world of light. And as industrial technologies drill deeper into the seabed than ever before, extracting minerals, rare earth metals, and fossil fuels, vibrations from these operations create low-frequency disturbances that travel vast distances, disrupting the delicate pressure-sensitive organs deep-sea creatures rely on for orientation, communication, and balance. Some species become so disoriented they lose the ability to regulate buoyancy, drifting upward helplessly until they reach layers of the ocean, where survival becomes impossible. Meanwhile, the spread of microplastics has reached a staggering scale, infiltrating the tissues of deep-dwelling creatures, altering their chemical balance, interfering with hormonal regulation, and damaging the organs that control depth stability, leading to accidental ascents that deposit weakened animals into surface waters where they are easily observed by the human eye. At the same time, biological rhythms synchronized over millions of years are being thrown into chaos by warming waters, altering the timing of migrations, spawning cycles, and feeding patterns. Deep-sea predators following prey upward find themselves rising too far, too fast, entering territories where their physiology cannot cope, resulting in sightings of bizarre, elongated, pale organisms drifting near coastlines, sparking fear, fascination, and speculation among surface dwellers. And in regions where ocean acidification intensifies, the sensory systems of deep-sea animals designed to detect tiny chemical signals in the darkness begin to malfunction, causing them to misread cues, lose their ability to interpret directional acidity gradients, and ascend in a state of confusion, drawn toward regions of water that feel stable only because their detection systems have been compromised. All these forces combine to create a world in which deep-sea creatures rise not by choice but by compulsion, driven upward by invisible pressures that reshape the ocean's ancient boundaries. Their appearances at the surface, whether alive, dying, or already lifeless, are messages, warnings, indicators that the deep ocean's balance is reaching a breaking point, and each sighting, each inexplicable encounter with a creature designed for darkness, is a reminder that the ocean's most mysterious realm is changing rapidly, responding to a world that has itself begun to shift beyond recognition. These beings, whose ancestors survived asteroid impacts, ice ages, and mass extinctions, now struggle to endure a crisis created in mere centuries, a crisis that is forcing them into the light not as explorers but as refugees of a planet in turmoil. As we continue to probe the staggering phenomena of deep-sea creatures rising toward the surface, we are confronted with an overwhelming convergence of forces, climatic, geological, chemical, and human, that together form a crisis unlike any the ocean has experienced in its multi-million-year history. And as we trace these forces through the vertical and horizontal dimensions of the planet's waters, it becomes increasingly evident that each appearance of an oarfish gliding near the shore, an anglerfish drifting in shallow light, or a translucent gulper eel floating disoriented in surface currents, represents a symptom of a much larger, systemic collapse, for the abyss, once a stable, predictable, and self-contained ecosystem, now pulses with instability as warming penetrates deeper, stratification blocks oxygen replenishment, and currents shift unpredictably, disrupting the precise timing and location of plankton blooms, predator-prey interactions, and nutrient transport, leaving species caught in a labyrinth of stress from which escape is only possible upward. The expansion of oxygen minimum zones, now reaching far into midwater layers, forces creatures that once thrived in calm darkness into zones of peril, compelling vertical migrations that are not natural but involuntary, and when these organisms ascend too rapidly, they suffer barotrauma, internal hemorrhaging, and metabolic shock, exposing themselves to predators, sunlight, and human observation in ways that render the once invisible abyss suddenly visible. Meanwhile, deep-sea mining operations, industrial drilling, and seismic surveys compound these pressures by creating vast noise, vibration, and sediment plumes that disrupt delicate ecosystems for miles around, damaging corals, smothering filter feeders, and altering the chemical environment that many species depend upon. These disturbances force animals to flee, often upward, creating surges of rare and unusual species in the upper ocean that appear to humans as mysterious, inexplicable invasions when in fact they are the direct consequence of centuries of environmental neglect concentrated in the last few decades. In addition, microplastics, heavy metals, and other pollutants have penetrated even the remotest reaches of the ocean, accumulating in the tissues of deep-dwelling fauna, weakening organ systems, impairing buoyancy control, and increasing susceptibility to disease, all of which contribute to involuntary ascents and surface appearances. The disruption of long-established biological rhythms adds yet another layer of stress. Creatures that once synchronized their vertical migrations with the rise and fall of plankton, or timed reproduction to stable seasonal cycles, now encounter food sources displaced by warming, currents altered by shifting winds, and predators whose patterns are no longer predictable, resulting in migrations that carry them too far upward or too far into hostile regions. Climate-driven events such as marine heat waves, intensified El Niño cycles, and abrupt upwelling events now act as sudden elevators, moving entire communities toward the surface in massive, unnatural waves, creating shocking displays of life previously hidden from human sight. Geological events like underwater landslides, volcanic eruptions, and the destabilization of methane hydrates also propel creatures upward, while the intrusion of light and noise from human activities further disorients and drives animals into the upper layers, creating the impression of an invasion when it is, in truth, an emergency exodus. Together, these forces warming, deoxygenation, industrial disruption, chemical pollution, noise, light intrusion, geological upheaval, and ecosystem collapse paint a picture of the deep as a living system under duress, where creatures rise not out of curiosity, but as desperate responders to a planet being reshaped faster than evolution can adjust. Each surface sighting is a signal flare, a living alarm that the deepest ecosystems are no longer stable, that the very foundation of Earth's climate and marine cycles is in motion, and that the balance of life itself is being tested in ways that have never before been recorded in human history, forcing us to recognize that the abyss is not distant, not isolated, and not eternal, but intimately connected to the survival of life on the planet, and that these rising emissaries of the deep are delivering a warning of unprecedented magnitude, that the oceans are in crisis, and the world above must pay heed before the silent realm beneath is forever altered beyond recovery. As we reach the culmination of this exploration into the enigmatic and increasingly visible world of deep-sea creatures rising toward the surface, the full scope of the crisis becomes undeniable. The ocean's deepest realms, once thought to exist beyond the reach of human influence, are now inextricably entangled with the fate of our civilization, their silent dramas played out in ways that only now, through the rising appearances of species such as oarfish, giant squid, anglerfish, gulper eels, and other rarely seen abyssal organisms, can be perceived. These creatures, evolved over millions of years to survive in complete darkness, crushing pressure, near freezing temperatures, and near constant isolation, are being forced upward by a convergence of forces warming waters that destabilize thermal refuges, expanding oxygen minimum zones that suffocate their delicate physiology, acidifying seas that impair chemical sensing, disrupted food webs that leave them starving or misdirected, and human intrusions ranging from industrial noise and sonar to seabed mining and microplastic pollution, all acting in concert to push life out of the shadows where it has persisted unbroken for millennia. Geological events compound the stress: underwater landslides, tectonic shifts, submarine volcanic eruptions, and the destabilization of methane hydrates trigger sudden displacements, moving entire communities like living debris, while currents altered by climate change and shifts in thermohaline circulation carry organisms further from their stable habitats, often to shallower waters where survival becomes impossible. The intricate rhythms that once orchestrated life in the abyss are now fractured. Diel vertical migrations occur at the wrong times, reproductive cycles are mistimed, feeding patterns disrupted, and predators forced into unfamiliar territories, causing cascading disruptions that propagate upward through the water column, creating surface appearances that to human observers seem anomalous, bizarre, or even mythic, but which are in reality a profound indicator of systemic collapse. Even the physical mechanisms of these creatures are overwhelmed. Barotrauma from rapid ascents, ruptured swim bladders, internal hemorrhaging, and metabolic shock leave many unable to return to their proper depths, resulting in mortality rates that increase with each anomalous migration. In tandem, industrial impacts, noise pollution from sonar and shipping, light intrusion from vessels, and sediment plumes from deep-sea extraction further disorient species that evolved in absolute darkness, confusing sensory organs and forcing disoriented animals toward the surface, while microplastics and chemical contaminants infiltrate tissues, impairing buoyancy, organ function, and survival instincts. Collectively, these converging pressures paint a portrait of the deep ocean as a system under unprecedented duress, a world whose balance has been disturbed in ways that ripple through global ecosystems, carbon cycles, and climate regulation, and whose rising creatures act as living messengers, each a signal flare that the stability of Earth's oceans and by extension, the stability of life itself is in jeopardy. Coastal communities and global scientists alike are witnessing the consequences: fisheries disrupted, ecosystem dynamics altered, and the mysterious emergence of deep-sea species into human visible zones acting as both spectacle and warning. Ultimately, these ascents are not random or superficial events, they are the culmination of centuries of environmental pressures converging in a single moment of ecological revelation, a dramatic testimony to the interconnectedness of the ocean's depths and the surface world. Each rising creature tells a story of survival, desperation, and the urgent need for humanity to recognize that the ocean is a living system whose health dictates planetary equilibrium, and that the abyss is no longer a distant, inaccessible frontier but a critical and sensitive domain whose distress signals now appear unmistakably before our eyes. The surface sightings are the living evidence that the deep is communicating its crisis, demanding acknowledgement, action, and understanding, and they remind us that every rise of a creature from darkness into light is not merely a biological phenomenon, but a narrative of planetary transformation, warning, and the profound consequences of a world whose most hidden regions are now reaching upward to the surface, revealing a story of environmental upheaval, survival struggle, and the fragile, imperiled balance of life on Earth, a story that will continue to unfold in ways both visible and invisible unless urgent measures are taken to preserve the integrity of the planet's largest and most mysterious ecosystem.